We do have a fairly big audience today, so we're using the webinar format. I know that has its pros and cons, but what we'd really love to do is hear from you in the chat. So please do say hello in the chat, tell us who you are, where you're joining us from. You can tell us a bit about your funding challenges. I suppose hearing there isn't enough will be one of the main themes, but tell us about your successes as well, what's worked well for you. We are recording the sessions. What we're going to do to try and make sure we get the question and answer bit is ask you to use the Q&A specifically to ask any questions while we're having our presentations from our funders. You are able to ask anonymously as well. I believe there's a box that you can check if you want to ask anonymously. If you put the questions in the Q&A, then it means we will make sure we see them, whereas we know that in the chat, if you're all doing nice instructions and chatting to each other, we don't want to miss any questions in there. You can also upvote questions from other people, so if there's one that actually covers something you'd like to know, then do let us know. We will get to as many as we can. It's not always easy to say how many we'll get. We'll be able to look at them too, and if there's ones that we don't get to but we can answer afterwards, we'll send that out with a follow-up email. Hopefully all of you know about Funding Scotland, which is SCVO's funding database. You'll find lots of different opportunities and fund opportunities there. You can use things like filtering by your area, by the people you're working with, lots of different things. And we also have, just a bit more about Funding Scotland. And we've also recently launched some extra premium features. So that's for members of SCVO, which is free to anyone with an income of under 100,000 and staggered for other organisations. So that includes things like bulletins, saving your favourite searches, adding your own notes to keep track of your applications, and a bit of extra information. But of course, there is lots of great information available to everyone, including the fund information, being able to sort your searches, and a weekly bulletin to let you know about new and soon to open funds as well. And this is just part of SCVO's funding work that we do. So we also provide information and support, including top tips on things like writing an application, which I know many of you will have had to do. You probably have your own top tips too. We provide training and webinars across a whole range of funding topics. We work in funding and funding policy too, to try and kind of fly the flag for fairer funding, multi-year funding, better funding for the sector. We have the gathering, which is coming up in February next year, which will have sessions on kind of practical tips for fundraising, as well as some of the big issues of the day. And we also give investment and strategy advice for members too, which is a newer service that we launched. So there you go, just a bit of a flag for our membership. If you're not a member, please do have a look. If you are a member, then hopefully you'll explore the benefits, but please do make sure that you've seen everything that you get access to. That's all from me for now, so I'm very pleased to be able to hand over to Andrew and Gordon to talk to you about the work that the Architectural Heritage Fund does. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Rachel. Andrew's just going to sort out some slides. We're just going to run through a few slides, sort of first of all, with hopefully some pretty pictures as well. And then we'll be very happy to sort of take some questions. I see there's lots of people introducing themselves in the chat, which is great. It's got a really good, interesting mixture of people and organisations. So my name's Gordon Barr. I'm the Development Manager for Scotland for the Architectural Heritage Fund. My colleague Andrew, you'll be hearing more from him later. He's on the investment team. He deals more with the loan side of things. I deal more with the grant side of things, and we'll explain a little bit about that sort of as we go along. So we're the Architectural Heritage Fund. We're an independent charity. We operate across the UK. We have different funding programmes in each of the 4 UK nations. Here in Scotland, we are very active, I'm pleased to say. We've been giving grants and support to different primarily community-led organisations trying to find sustainable uses for historic buildings. We've been running since 1976. As you'll see from the map, we've supported projects right across the whole geography of Scotland, from the north of Shetland right down to the borders, and right out from the Western Isles and across the eastern tips as well. So really good sort of geographic sort of spread. So over 400 different projects across the country. So since we started giving grants, I think about 1986, we've given over 550 grants. That's over £4 million worth of grant funding since the early 90s. And We give loan finance to support projects as well, over 170 different loan offers, over £20 million worth of loan funding to support projects since 1976. Our kind of key, our own key funders there are Historic Environment Scotland, the William Grant Foundation, and also the National Lottery Heritage Fund as well, supporting our programmes in Scotland. So what sort of things do we look to fund? We're the Architectural Heritage Fund, so you have to be talking about a building, basically. That's the kind of key, our kind of core criteria. There has to be a building of some kind of historic merit involved, but it's not just about the building. It's about what you want to do with the building. That's the crucial thing for us. So ask not what you can do for the building, what could this historic building be doing for your community? And the key thing is we're hoping to help you find a sustainable new use for historic buildings, a building that matters to you in your community, a building of importance, but the key thing is what you want to do with it. It's not enough. We won't give you funding just to repair the building or save the building for the building's sake, but we will give you funding to do something meaningful with the building that will allow it to have a new use again for your community. So we're looking for projects that have a heritage impact, but crucially have a strong social and economic impact as well. We want to support social enterprises, want to support community businesses. We're really interested in affordable housing as well. And we're very interested in opportunities for communities to either take ownership of a historic building or control of a historic building. And by controlling a long-term lease where you actually have some say over the building fabric. Next slide, please, Andrew. I think it's worth saying what we don't fund as much as what we do fund. Sometimes that's simpler. We have quite wide eligibility criteria. We can fund organisations at sort of any stage, pretty much any sort of formally constituted not-for-profit organisation we can potentially fund, certainly at the early stage. If you're a registered charity, that obviously that helps, or moving towards that. We can fund SKIOs, we can fund companies limited by guarantee, we can fund community business, community benefit societies. Do speak to us. The only sort of things we don't fund are, first of all, churches that are still in full-time religious use or religious ownership, not because we've anything particular against churches, quite the opposite, but just because there's so many of them. If, however, and churches is a big thing at the moment in Scotland, and potential use of our churches is a big issue, if the church is moving out of full-time religious use and is looking for a new use and potentially a new owner, then that's definitely something we can help with. And we'll have some examples of that kind of later on. We don't fund projects that are only about repairs or maintenance or just kind of upgrading the fabric of an existing use. We're really looking for either a change of use or a change of ownership, usually, to get involved. And we don't fund projects where it's just an individual that's involved or a private owner of a building. And we don't fund organisations that are out to make money, basically. But within those provisos, we've got quite a wide kind of eligibility criteria. And this final one, we don't fund buildings without historic interest. With the Architectural Heritage Fund, the building has to be of historic interest. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a listed building, but if it is, that helps. But if it's not, we'd want you to be able to explain to us, why is this building of importance to your community? Why does it mean something to you that you want to be doing something to bring it back to life? All right, so the sorts of grants we can offer to help along the kind of project journey. Kind of two key ones I'm going to talk about today are viability grants and development grants. We also have some capital and other types of grants as well, though not at Scotland at the moment for the capital. But the key thing we're always looking for in any of these sort of stages is looking at what's the governance of the organisation, how you set up, what business planning have you done about what it is you want to do with the building. And the crucial thing, as I say, is we want the building or whatever you end up using it for to be sustainable for the long term. And that means financially sustainable as well as other types of sustainability. So have you done your homework? What's the community need? What's the market demand? What's your strategy for raising the funding? And these are all things that we can help you with, and our funding can help you with developing as well. We want to look at the ownership of the building. If you don't yet own it or control it, what's the plan to do that? Increasingly, obviously, we're very interested in your plans for environmental sustainability as well. Particularly these older buildings, there's lots of opportunities to improve their environmental sustainability, particularly big old cold drafty churches. And we are still interested in the building itself and what its, as I say, what its kind of historic need is, or what its historic interest is to your community. So in terms of what actual money potentially, let's get to the good stuff we can offer. We've got two core grants in Scotland that are most relevant at these early stages. And these are early stage grants. These are helping things get started. And this first grant is our project viability grant. It's up to 10,000. The average grant's about 6,000 or 7,000. No match funding is required for this grant. It's very early days. And the key point of this grant is to help you decide, is there a project here? Should we take on this building? Can we figure out a way to make this work or not? And sometimes the outcome from this piece of work is not. Don't do this. It's not going to work. And actually, that's a really powerful thing to be able to establish early on. And you know, that's a shame if you can't figure out a way to make it work. But if it's not going to work, the earlier you can make that call, the better. So the key kind of questions that this funding can help support answering is to say, should we take on this building or not? How much would it cost to buy it? We can fund valuations. What would we be looking to use it for or do with it if we did own it? Looking at kind of options appraisal work. What would we need to do? What changes physically would we need to make to the building to make it work for its new use? Kind of different options appraisal work, or sort of architect plans. What would it cost us to make these sort of changes? You know, QS, quantity surveyor stuff. And how would we make the money to be able to pay to run the building for the long term, looking at the business planning? These are all things that potentially that grant can help pay towards. Now, as I say, it is up to 10K. It doesn't require any match funding. We're not suggesting that one grant can help pay for all of these things, unfortunately. But it's about what's the most useful thing that we can help contribute to help you make the case that you want to move this project forward. That's that grant's sort of designed to do. Next slide, please, Andrew. Our next grant stage is our project development grant. That's for at the point where we decide we definitely do want to move forward with this. And you've got a kind of outline idea or outline sketch, outline costs of what you'd like to do with the building. And now it's a time to kind of put meat on the bones of those plans, to really develop the plans, get the detail, de-risk the project, figure out exactly how much it's going to cost, and kind of help you bring the project to the point that you're able to then look to apply to other larger capital funders, whether that's Historic Environment Scotland or the lottery or various other things as well. The development grants up to 40K. Individual grants are usually smaller, averages about 15K at the moment, but you can come back into us multiple times to this grant over a period of time. We are the sort of funder we like to, if we decide that we want to support your project, we will be happy to support you over the long term. And we've got projects and organisations that come back to us multiple times over the years for different pieces of work at different points as a sort of project develops. The project development grant does usually require some match funding, usually about 50%. We can be quite flexible on that. But the two key things that grant's most useful or most commonly used for is to do further development work on the project, usually paying for like a design team, an architect, planning fees, those sorts of things. As I say, putting meat on the bones of the outline sketch and developing the project forward. But the other thing that grant can also help pay for, which is also really useful, is helping build the capacity of your organisation to actually take on and manage potentially a kind of big capital project. Quite a lot of the organisations we work with are entirely voluntary run and led. I'm sure many of you here are like that. And what this grant can help you do is look to be taking on a dedicated staff member or sometimes consultant, sometimes staff member, someone whose job it is to actually work on this project and help you deliver it. Project organizer, project manager, that sort of thing. Sometimes it's a fundraiser. We try not to be prescriptive about the specifics of what you should be spending the money on. It's about what's the most appropriate, the most useful thing for your organization, in your community, and your individual project. And we talk you through this. We try and help understand what are your needs and what's the best way for us to potentially help you support that. But that potential to contribute towards building the capacity of an organization is really, really useful. So here, let's have a look at a specific project in action, if you like, a case study here, and it is a church, very appropriate. This is a lovely church in Kilmarnock. It was B-listed church. It was called the Grange Church originally. It was closed by the Church of Scotland several years ago. It was sold on to a private owner, and it's now in the hands of Above Adventure, which is a community-led not-for-profit organisation based in Kilmarnock, and it's now a completely accessible and inclusive indoor climbing centre, which is a great use for this church building. Big high ceilings, lots of internal space. It's a B-listed building. That one of the things that's really important to say is some people think just because the building's listed, oh no, that means we can't change anything, we can't do anything, it's got to be preserved. Nothing could be further from the truth. The building is listed means you need to be paying attention to why it's important. What is it about the building that's important of historic merit, but that doesn't mean you can't change things. The building needs to change and adapt to changing needs, and we absolutely want to encourage you to do that. Doesn't mean you just want to go knocking things down willy-nilly. Sorts of things we can help pay for, again, include things like conservation plans to look at what is it about the building that we want to make sure we make an effort to retain. So here in this church, the pews were taken out, the balcony was largely removed, so huge major internal changes, but the exterior of the building was restored really beautifully. Things like the stained glass windows are kept in place. They've looked at what do we need to change and what do we want to keep, and it's a really nice example of that. So if we go on to the next slide, you'll see there's a great photograph here of how the church looks inside now. It's a quite exciting space with the this is taken from the back of the remains of the balcony, and you'll see some of the original historic stained glass is still there. It's a quite unique experience climbing up a climbing wall right next to these beautiful stained glass windows. So it's a real mixture of the historic but also the new use blending together. Now, this project had a number of different types of support from us over the years, and I say over the years because these things do often take quite a lot of time. This was 8 years from when we first got involved with the project to them opening the doors, and that's not an unusual timeline, sort of 5, 6, 7, 8, sometimes 9, 10, sometimes longer years. So that is something that starting one of these projects you do have to be aware of. You can be in this for the long haul. And managing people's expectations and managing the expectations of communities is something you do have to be aware of. So we originally gave them some funding in 2015 to look at the feasibility study. Could we make this building work for our needs? They decided they could. So they came back the next year and got a grant for some design team fees for their architect to look at sketching out a bit more detail, and came back again a couple of more years later as they wanted to further refine the plans. They also had a couple of loans from us as well, over £200,000 worth of lending, initially to help with a meanwhile use in the church hall while they were working on their plans for the rest of the building, and then helping with working capital to help deliver the full project. And we were also able to introduce them to some other specific funders as well to help out with that capital funding too. Next slide, please. I better get moving and actually let Andrew get a word in before we run out of time. But just a couple of before and after pictures here of just the building was in a real poor state inside. It's really quite an exciting space now, and as I say, a real transformation of the building and a really fantastic resource for Kilmarnock. And the last time I was down there, it was really during the school holidays. They were queued out the door, young people waiting to get in and start using the space, which was really exciting to see. So that's just one example of the kind of project that we can support and have supported. I'll shut up now and hand over to Andrew to talk a bit more about our lending side of support as well.
Thank you very much, Gordon. I'm Andrew. I'm one of the 2 investment managers at the AHF. So I handle all of our sort of loan applications and yeah, most of the loan side of things here at the AHF. So we are the only specialist lender for historic buildings in the United Kingdom. So the other social investors do lend for historic buildings, but none of them are perhaps as knowledgeable and specialists as we are about that, and I'll come on to that in a minute around what that means. So our loans, yeah, they're a form of social investment, which means that when we invest in a project, we're looking for what's the social impact that we can deliver with our funds, our charity funds, and what's the historic impact, heritage impact. So what buildings we're saving. Then when the funds are paid to us, they get reinvested into other projects. So it's a really kind of sustainable way for us to be doing this nearly 50 years. Still recycling the same funds that we've had for nearly 50 years on the whole. But social investment, for those who aren't aware, there are lots of different types of social investment, including community shares. But most forms, including loans, work quite well alongside grants. So I think for the type of projects we support, it's not really about, not applying for grants still. Normally it's a combination of all of them. But where social investment can help is it can be more flexible. It can be quicker to get loans than it can be for grants. Grants are clearly finite and increasingly so in Scotland. Social investment, there's generally funds available. And with social investment, you can have a bit more flexibility. Grants tend to be a bit more restricted in what they can be used for. Social investment loans less so. If you want to find out more about loans in general, there's a really excellent website called Good Finance. They publish loads of information around kind of social investment and whether it's right for your organisation. There's a really good sort of toolkit on there as well, and there's a directory of different social investors. So that's a really excellent resource I'd recommend. But more specifically in what we can do, so We can lend for sort of 5 broad purposes. So the first one is, working capital towards a redevelopment of a building. So that's quite a lot of what we do. So if you're redeveloping a building, we can help with part of the costs of that. We can do loans to help you buy a building. That can include both freehold and leasehold acquisition. We can do cash flow loans. So these are, we do quite a lot of this. This is where you may have been awarded a grant from, say, National Lottery Heritage Fund, Community Ownership Fund, but where that money's coming through in arrears, we can lend some funds to help sort of help you maintain a level of cash flow while, and be able to pay contractors. We can do quite sort of less glamorous stuff. So we can support sort of smaller scale improvements to buildings. So we've funded an organisation in England recently to put a water tank on the roof so that they could open up a bathroom on the top floor of a mill, which has then enabled them to use the top floor of that mill and start to bring in, an income from that, right through to sort of, smaller scale energy improvements we can provide loans towards as well. Just briefly on that picture, that's Observatory House in Edinburgh. So perhaps a slightly unusual loan for us. Artists Collective has the site at the top of Carlton Hill, including the old observatory. That's the City of Astronomers House that they've converted into a holiday let. It's very nice inside. But that now brings in a huge amount of unrestricted income for the charities. So it's a really excellent use of social investment. So taking on debt to generate, a return. So just a very brief sort of case study of one of our loan clients. This is quite a recent client we've supported with a loan. So this is a historic windmill in Carluke in South Lanarkshire. It's one of the few remaining examples of a traditional Scottish windmill in Scotland. Believe it or not, one of the most intact, even though it's half fallen down. It's also a Category A listed building. So built in the 1970s, it's in bad shape. It sits on a very large site though, with multiple other buildings. And over the past few years, it's become very, very important to the community. So there's a large community garden on the site. There's like men's sheds on the site. They have school groups there. They've hosted lots of different community activity. So they've been trying to find a use for the building over the past several years that maintains the sort of heritage asset in the middle, but actually is still very relevant to the community and isn't just a tourist attraction or a museum. So they're finding a use that is essentially both. We've supported this project for a number of years. I think the early 2010s was our first grant to this project. And there have been a few since then to sort of help them refine what they're going to do. You can see in the slide, the bottom right picture is what it might look like eventually. There'll be 3 phases to this project. The third phase is the new bit on the right. They've now got funding for phase 1, which will restore the actual sort of the historic parts of the site, funding from the Scottish Government, Historic Environment Scotland and National Lottery Heritage Fund. And that's going to cost 2.2 million. So this is not that's quite a large invoices coming in sort of every month from contractors that the charity would possibly be able to meet, but actually there's a few scary bits in their project cash flow. So they've taken a loan from us of £100,000, which gives them the cash flow to be able to deliver the projects, and it'll be repaid at the end with on the receipt of grant funding. Just briefly on our loan terms. So our loans are our lowest loan is 25,000 up to 500,000. We can do more. We have done larger loans in the past. It's quite unusual for us, but we can do it. Typically, these are repayable within a 5-year term. So that might be that the loan would be repaid with earned income or grant income, or that it's refinanced with a lender that can give much longer terms, a traditional lender like a bank. Again, though, we can, in some circumstances, depending on what we've got available, do longer terms. So I would say it's always worth speaking to us to see what we can do. Our interest rate is typically 8%, which is broadly in line with other social investors, cheaper than banks on the whole. Our loans are secured and unsecured. So again, it depends on the sort of the amount that you would borrow or the level of risk. But again, we would try and sort of find a way that makes sense for both. We have quite a good internal sort of support program called Replan, where we have access to quite a large number of consultants based all around the UK who are fully funded to work with our clients to kind of help them through some of, you know, the inevitable sort of sticky points of trying to work on these buildings. So our clients find that extremely useful. Because of the nature of the projects we support, one of the things that we are fairly unique in offering is that we can do capital and interest repayment holidays. So because quite often the buildings might not generate any sort of income for the first couple of years while they're being, you know, worked on, we allow clients that sort of break before we start to see repayment. We also don't charge any repayment fees. So if you're lucky enough, and this has happened, to get a large donation halfway through, you know, there's no sort of penalty then to pay us back early. It does happen. And that's it on loan. So on here are our contact details, which I'll also put in the chat, and I think SCVO will share as well afterward. But yeah, I'll stop sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gordon and Andrew. That was really interesting. And I know that for many of our members and people we work with who are managing buildings, it will be a relief to hear that there are ways of getting support, particularly with some of those areas like development and loans as well, which can be tricky to get funded. Everyone has been very efficient about answering questions in the chat, but I'm just going to flag a couple because I think they're interesting for the wider audience. So there was one from Alan Murray in the chat earlier about how is historic interest defined?
I'll take that one if you like. We try not to define it too strictly, is the first thing to say. Partly because we don't want to exclude really good, interesting projects by having too narrow a definition of that. If the building's listed in a conservation area, then that's an easy tick. If it's not, then if you can explain to us convincingly why it's of historic interest to you or to your community more specifically, and then we're willing to listen. So as I say, we try to be quite flexible in how we interpret that within reason.
Great, and then there was a question from Natalie as well, which you've answered, but I just wanted to flag it. So Natalie had said that on behalf of Leith School of Art, they already own the listed building, which is a former Norwegian seaman's church. So I am singing shanties in my head, which is a little bit crumbly. Natalie says, so the use wouldn't change dramatically, but there would be a kind of broadening of who could use it with a focus on low incomes and benefits. Would that be a sufficient kind of change?
As I sort of said in the chat, it depends on the nature of what you're looking to do to enable that change. Again, the sort of change of use sort of criteria, again, we try to be flexible where we can in terms of interpreting that. That's not necessarily a restriction at all in terms of the lending, it's worth saying. So depending on the nature of the things, it might be something we can definitely support. We could potentially support through the lending. For the grants, we are looking for a kind of meaningful change. Often that's bringing spaces back into use that aren't well used, sometimes because you can't get access to them, you know, in terms of access improvements, lifts, you know, that sort of thing. Happy to pick up that conversation with her in more detail and learn a little bit more about the specifics. One of the really fun things for us is because we operate across the UK, we see projects, you know, in the ground. We've got a great project in Wales, which is also a Norwegian church we've been supporting at the moment. I think quite a different one. It's in terms of the architecture, but seeing those links and helping you know, introduce projects to each other is something else that we do as well. That can often be quite useful.
And then we had a question from Diane from Plunkett UK about supporting community-owned pubs, and the good news was that yes, there have absolutely been grants and loans for community pubs in the past. So good news if that's something that you're interested in doing. Last couple of minutes to chuck a question in the chat. I was just going to ask, so how might people show the benefit to the community of the project they have planned? What kind of ways can they show that in applications?
I'm happy to, yeah. So we're quite happy to consider kind of the potential future benefits, particularly with loans. It might not be that there's an immediate benefit from the building if it's about acquiring it and then doing work on it. We're very open-minded around what that means. So that could be creating an asset that can deliver kind of training opportunities, volunteering opportunities. It could be that it's an office or a new base for a charity that's delivering services. It could be we funded daycare centres. We've funded community shops, community pubs. So I kind of, it's almost over to you really to tell us what the social impact you're delivering is, and there's a good chance it's something that we'll be interested in.
Yeah, and sometimes it's about not the project itself might not deliver much social impact, but it might generate income to make your organisation more sustainable,
Yes.
and you might be doing other things, around about as well. So we look at what you wanting for the organisation sort of in the round and how the project fits into the kind of needs of the wider community. We fund housing, we fund business centres, we fund all sorts. We're not, as I say, we're not prescriptive about you need to do this. It's about what do you need? What is the need in your community, and how can reusing this historic building help you make that happen?
Great, thank you. And would a loan be acceptable towards the end of the completion of a project to cover things like new staff salaries in the period before people are kind of up and running and earning income?
Yeah, we'd consider that. So with the loans, we're also, as well as the kind of the change at the start, we're interested in kind of that startup process. So we're here to support organisations that operate from historic buildings as well as those taking them on.
Great, and then I think probably a couple of final questions. So whilst it's understood that you can't support kind of new build development projects, can it support, I feel like this might be quite a specific question, the exhibiting of historical exhibits within it, for example, 3,000 geological specimens?
The short answer is no, sorry. Architectural Heritage Fund has to be a building involved. Quite how you define buildings is a different question. So we can't really fund new build things. We can fund if there's a new build element to a project, involving a historic building or looking at master planning on a site and stuff. So we can contribute to that sort of thing. But we can't do new build specifically, and that sounds more like something like Museums Galleries Scotland type of project. Sounds really interesting, but probably not one for us, unfortunately.
Thank you. And then just finally, so Alan has said in the chat that their organisation has been serving the community for decades, but they need changes to the historic building to make it sustainable. As I'm sure many people will recognise, energy costs are killing us, is what Alan says. They have to show new activities to be able to get funding.
I wouldn't say to show new activities. We're not the lottery fund. We're not necessarily looking for new activities, but unfortunately, we don't have specific funding just for improving the energy efficiency of buildings. It's something we're keen to do, but we don't have the funding to do at the moment. If you're looking to change how you're using the building, and the energy efficiency is part, and looking at the energy efficiency will be part of that process, then potentially. So I think something like that is one where I'd be happy to have a follow-up discussion and learn a bit more detail about the specifics of the building and the nature of what you're trying to do, and then we can see what we can do. And if we can't help you, then we'd always try and signpost you to somewhere, hopefully, that could.
Great. Thank you very much, Gordon and Andrew. That was really interesting. I definitely want to go to that climbing wall church.
Highly recommend it. A very nice coffee as well, which is also good.
Oh, even better. So yeah, I think Andrew and Gordon are going to stick around for a bit. So if you do have some more questions, you can stick them in the chat and they'll try to get to them. And they both emphasised that, please do get in touch. We'll share those contact details as well to make sure that you can follow that up if you've got a kind of specific situation you'd like to discuss. But yeah, thank you very much. That was really fascinating to hear and really, really positive to hear about the support you offer. So now I'm going to hand us over to Labros from People's Postcode Trust. It's going to do a presentation about the work that you do. Again, same deal. If you can stick questions in the Q&A so that we can make sure we spot them in amongst the chat. You can kind of like them if you see one that's similar to what you want to ask, and then we'll have a chat with Labros after his presentation. So over to you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you everyone for coming. I look forward to answering more questions. I've already answered a couple in the Q&A, and I will get through the presentation and then field the questions afterwards. So please feel free to jot them down in that chat. So People's Postcode Trust is one of the 6 community programs trusts that we run that cover different parts of the country. So we have the People's Postcode Trust for Scotland. We also have the Postcode Community Trust, which covers Wales. And then we have 4 trusts which cover the 4 different regions of England, the north, south, east, and west. But specifically for Scotland, People's Postcode Trust. So just see about getting this to move on. There we go. So People's Postcode Lottery has been operational since 2005. And To date, we've raised over £1.3 billion for charities and good causes, which is absolutely amazing. I think it's around £18 million a month is raised currently. That is for charities and good causes. And from every subscription that someone takes up with the lottery, 33% of that goes directly to charities and good causes. So if there is anyone in the audience that is a player of People's Postcode Lottery, thank you very much for your support. This does make some absolutely amazing work possible. And if you're not a player and you would like to be, just go and have a look on our website. That would be fantastic. So People's Postcode Trust Scotland, as I've explained, and that's right up to the far North Islands, to the west, and everywhere in between. So really good coverage. And in 2024, so far we've delivered more than £2.3 million worth of funding in grants across Scotland. And for the last and final round, there is a further around about £1.2 million still to be distributed in grants, and I'll run through a few details about those now. So we work to a set of themes, and these are, we've tried to sort of focus them in over the years. The first one being providing support to improve mental health. We specifically have focused this into improve mental health. It was previously mental well-being, but we found that that was really broad, and we were being absolutely inundated with thousands and thousands of applications. So the mental health is specifically to support organizations that provide support within their communities for things like autism and dementia, mental health conditions like depression, ADHD, all those sorts of things, but specifically providing a service focused on mental health rather as mental well-being or general well-being. The second theme is enabling participation in the arts. So this is any organizations that provide that support, and that could be theatre, that could be art classes, it could be music, it could be a whole variety of different things around the arts. We also then have a theme which is providing, oh, sorry, I've jumped back a slide. There we go. So providing support for organizations that support marginalized groups and tackle inequality. We found that in the last year and a half, this theme has the one that sort of pushed itself to the forefront, and is one that we receive the most applications to currently. The next is the theme around enabling participation in physical activity. And this is anything from bowls clubs to croquet clubs to tennis to anything where the hook is sport and getting people out and being more active, which is always good. It also sort of ties in with getting people out and less isolated and socializing. We then have our two green themes. The first is a very sort of people-centric one, which is improving green spaces and increasing access to the outdoors. And this is anything from improving parklands, community orchards, all that sort of thing, just getting people outside and spending time outside. And the second of the two green themes is very much the planet-centric one. And this is improving biodiversity and responding to the climate emergency. And this would be different things about educating children as the people of the future on biodiversity and how everything plays into supporting the climate and improving on things that are threatening the climate going forward. But also very interestingly, this could be responding to the climate emergency. We also have a lot of applications coming in here where people are improving sort of the insulation of buildings and providing different sources of heat and just generally improving how sustainable that building is and how the methods they use to sort of heat or cool or different things are used. And the final one is preventing or reducing the impact of poverty. And we see a lot of applications here around sort of food banks, around sort of clothes banks for school uniforms, for that sort of things, community lessons on budgeting or cooking or different things around money management, that sort of thing. Also a very, very popular theme through that reducing the impact of poverty. Now, in 2024, we introduced, purely unrestricted funding. So previously, through the trusts, we did project and unrestricted. But this year it is specifically unrestricted. So you'll see when you access our form that those questions are very organizationally specific questions, rather as project detail, and sort of we don't ask for cost breakdowns. We don't ask for anything sort of granular in a project sense. It's more about the organization, who you support, how you support them, and how they feed into the work that you do. So for funding, you can apply for anywhere between £500 and £25,000, depending on the type of organization you are. We ask that your ask shouldn't exceed 1/3 of your annual income. You can apply for, to do anything within your organization's charitable objectives. We do ask for you to make a clear link to one of our funding themes, and it's up to the organization applying to make that link and to just sort of show our group of assessors where that link is. We do ask a question around the real living wage. We're an accredited living wage funder. This doesn't exclude you from applying if you're not, but we do ask organizations to start thinking about, if money is being used for salaries, are you paying, on or above the real living wage rates? There are different organizational exclusions. All those details are in our funding guide, but that would be sort of Schedule 3 CICs, organizations whose objects are purely religious. We don't fund party political activities or organizations where government funding should be covering the work that is being done. And we also ask for funding to be spent within 18 months of being awarded. It's a one-stage application process. The online application form goes live when the funding rounds open, but there is already a downloadable Word document with the questions duplicated there so you can prepare your answers. We ask for supporting documents at application, and that's a copy of your full governing document and also your accounts signed by an independent examiner showing your expenditure for the most recent financial year. We did ask previously for those quotes around single physical items, but with it being purely unrestricted now, that has been taken out. We do ask for 2 contactable referees, and this could be organizations or people that you've worked with, your local MP or councillor, that sort of thing, anyone who can vouch for the validity and the knowledge of your organization. And we ask for details of a UK bank account in the name of your organization with 2 unrelated signatories. These just cover a little bit of the exclusions. So if you've been funded through any of our postcode trusts within the last 12 months, this does exclude you from applying. There's the Schedule 3 CICs. I want to highlight hospices where previously that wasn't be able to apply for, but we do hope that hospices, as long as they can show that none of that funding, and they will sign in the funding agreement if they are awarded, none of that funding is spent on the sort of medical element or medical equipment, but more on the support and sort of any counseling and anything like that. We do consider the counseling and support side. I've gone over the organizations with solely religious objects, and that 1/3 of your income is the amount that you can ask for. The most common ineligibility reasons that we've seen over the last couple of years is a very poor link or very tenuous link between the theme, the objects, and the organization's activity. Organizations that have been previously funded applying again before those 12 months are through. Religious objects where there's no other object that would sort of allow for the work with being carried out without it being sort of very heavily religiously influenced. And also any return of review or monitoring paperwork at the end not being sent through would exclude you from applying again. So our funding cycle takes 8 weeks. From week 1, when you apply, you will have a decision from us by week 4. And by the end of week 8, grants are paid into an organization's account if they're successful. So we do try and keep that in as tight as possible. And so far in the last 2 years, we haven't missed that 8-week cycle. And if you're successful, those funds are paid into your organization's account. We've been through 2 of the 3 rounds already. The next round for People's Postcode Trust opens on the 24th of September at 9 a.m. and it stays open for 7 days and closes at 12 noon on the 1st of October. Those dates are on our Trust website as well. So no need to worry to jot those down. They are there for you to get at a later stage. And if you're unsuccessful or if you've already applied this year and you've been unsuccessful, you know that you will receive tailored feedback. This is automatically supplied with every unsuccessful application. And if you have been unsuccessful, you will be able to apply one final time in 2024. But if you've already applied twice and not got through, we would be happy to support with any applications in early 2025. We do run partnerships with a couple of organizations. So first of all, Learning Through Landscapes, which is for outdoor learning classes. You can apply for £500 worth of equipment and also £500 worth of training for any staff that are carrying out the outdoor learning activities for children, just to get them outdoors, get them learning about nature. And a new one that we are launching, that will be launching, sorry, at the beginning of October, and that is with Sported Foundation, and that is for organizations that support communities through sport, and particularly the younger members of those communities. So those details are on our Trust website and the other funding opportunities. So please have a look through those. And finally, these are the Trust contact details. You can jot them down, or I will also share them with Rachel and Chris, and we can get those shared out after the meeting as well. I'm going to stop sharing now and see if we can answer a few questions, if there are some that have appeared in the chat, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Ross, and thank you for all that great information. And that 8-week funding cycle sounds fantastic. I know many people wait a lot longer for funds they've been promised, so good to hear that works. We do definitely have a few questions. So we've had a few questions through about a kind of upwards threshold for charities. So people asking about, what's the maximum turnover that you would accept an application from? Can larger charities apply?
So the maximum threshold is income has to be £1 million or under. So we do also, on our funding guide, we're quite transparent about the fact that should we be oversubscribed, we will show preference to organizations with an income under £250,000. So far this year, we haven't had an instance where we haven't been oversubscribed. It's been every funding round so far has been, we've been really inundated, and we've had to show preference to those organizations with that income under 250. So what we do say is, it doesn't, if your income is over 250,000, it doesn't exclude you, but the likelihood is that we will show preference to the smaller organizations first.
Thank you. And we've had quite a few questions, some of which you've answered, about the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. People asking about things like, if they are based in one area but cover a much broader area, is there a way to present that and to show that in their application?
Absolutely. So we realize, and like I said in a previous answer, we do realize that a lot of the registered addresses is not where the work is carried out, and that it does cover a broad area. We ask that you choose a postcode for an area where you feel the majority of your work's being carried out, or if you're focusing, if you think the funding you're getting from us will help you focus support in a particular area, maybe register the central postcode of that area in the project postcode slot on the application form.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answers the question for the few of you who had raised that. Julie has asked, what's the typical success rate for each round of People's Postcode Trust? So we know you've said you're often inundated, and you mentioned kind of tightening up some of the themes. Is the success rate going up or down? What's the trend there?
The success rate, definitely. I mean, last year we were looking at a success rate of around 1 in 4. We do know that this has gone up slightly now, and we're looking now, it's almost 1 in 3 being successful now. And we're looking further in 2025 to see how we can how we can draw that in as well, so that we don't have organizations spending loads of time putting applications in and not getting very far. So we're trying to sort of put the things in place on our application form that it will, you know what I mean? If people are applying, it gives them warnings all the way through that, you know, particular details they're putting in may end up, you know, for them not being successful. Just so that it stops a lot of that time wasting. But yeah, we are constantly striving to try and get things at a better success rate, basically, or to support further where we can.
Great, thank you. And we had a question from Kerry, who unfortunately has had 2 applications rejected. And the feedback was that other organisations covered more of the themes. So while their organisation does fall into multiple themes, it was hard to fit that in the application. So do you have a preference for applications that are covering more than one theme? And how should people best capture that in their application?
What I would recommend is if someone's applied twice and still been unsuccessful, drop an email into the trust inbox. You can put it in for my attention for Lambros, and I'll happily set up a meeting and we can sit and go through the previous applications and just see where we could maybe strengthen things in another application. If the applications have both been in this year, it'll mean for 2025. But if you've only done one so far this year, we can always work on an application for the end of this month's application window. But do drop an email into the chat. It would be interesting to have a look and see, you know what I mean, where that is, and has the link to that theme not been as strong as it could be, or is there maybe another theme that would be better to focus on?
Thank you, and Kerry, I hope you will take that up with Lambros, and for others too. It's a good idea to remember that the doors are open for a bit of a chat if you're not quite sure what's.
Our team love a chat.
Well, careful what you wish for. So we've got quite a few other questions. I'm just trying to have a look through. What about some of our younger charities who don't have their account yet, if they're less than a year older?
Yeah, because we've moved to totally unrestricted funding, we do one of those requirements which is securing we do have a duty of care to the funds raised by players of People's Postcode Lottery, and therefore we need to see operation within a full year before we can consider organizations to receive funding. So that criteria is there, and it will be staying for 2025, that you need to be operational for more than a full year before you can apply for funding.
So there you go, Fiona, there's your answer, but hopefully some ability to plan for when you are able to apply for that as well. Will capital projects with community impact be considered?
Absolutely, yes.
Great. Do you have some sense of the dates for the next round? So for people who are maybe not able to apply for the 1st of October deadline?
So if you're not able to apply for the 1st of October deadline, we haven't finalized funding rounds for next year, but it does generally fall around the beginning of March. So just have a look, because we operate different trusts, sometimes those dates are staggered through the year. But the first trusts, and I'm not sure if it will be the Scottish one, would be around the beginning of March or maybe the beginning of April 2025.
Yep. Thank you. The questions are coming in thick and fast with a few minutes left here. So Alan has asked in the chat that his organisation wants to buy simple, good quality PA systems to allow them to better serve the audiences and attract younger participants with things like open mic nights. Is that the kind of thing that someone could apply for funding for? Alan's estimate is that's around 3,500.
We specifically wouldn't look at that granular detail about what they want to purchase. The questions we ask would be around what the organization does, how they support their community, and you know, how the community feeds into that being what they need and what they think will better support them. But I would recommend popping onto the website, having a look at the application form, and if you've got any questions, drop us an email. But that granular detail around what they want to purchase, as long as it's not on our We Do Not Fund list, we don't need to know what you're spending it on.
Great. Thank you. Oh, Alan says that's a very enlightened attitude. So there you go. A bit of autonomy goes a long way. Could you give a specific example, asks Christine, about what's considered to be the impact of poverty? So is it things like lack of suitable housing, a lack of local services? I'm guessing Christine might also be thinking about some of the rural areas where, you know, people have a long round trip to get to kind of access amenities.
Absolutely. Do you know, combating the impacts of poverty we always look at it that if there is a situation where people don't have the same chances as everyone else because they cannot afford it, addressing that problem is, you know, helping alleviate the impacts of poverty. So, you know, if someone can't afford transport, which means they then can't access activities within the city, if they live rurally, that would be, you know, combating the impacts of poverty. If it's in the inner city or even in villages and village life, food banks, you know, teaching people how to budget, or teaching people on how to buy, you know, not cheaper quality, but value-wise, to make their money go further for budgeting for the households, how to cook meals with different ingredients that are going to cost them less, when to cook, when to do different things because electricity costs less. All that impacts poverty, and supports, you know, alleviates and supports that. So it's very different. So it's very interesting to read those applications when they come in. But as again, if there's any questions, drop us an email. We do hope that it's made quite clear in our funding guide, but if it's not, please get in touch. We would rather organizations got in touch before applying if they've got a question to ask.
Thank you, that's really useful. And I think that's probably just about our time done. So my apologies if we didn't quite get to your question, but what we will do is share the slides with the contact details. So you will be able to get in touch with any of our speakers if you do have a follow-up question as well. And I can see already a few of you are going to take that up. But just to say thank you very much for joining us and coming along. Thank you very much to Lambros and Andrew and Gordon for sharing about your work and some really positive information that I really hope some of you will apply for and will be successful in. We'll send out that email and you can let us know if there's anything else that you'd like to hear from SCVO, any other funders you would like to meet. But other than that, I hope you have a lovely day, everyone, and thanks very much for coming along. We'll see you soon.
Rachel, can I just add quickly, please, can we share the trust email address rather as my personal email address? Absolutely. I won't respond to queries on my personal one.
Yep, absolutely. We'll check all the details and get the right ones out to everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers, everyone.